What's up, everyone? Let's do why each sign gets broken up with. And standard disclaimer that this is these are generalizations, right? Like a better way of titling this video is just like me literally roasting the core flaws associated with each sign, archetype, whatever, but I'm not gonna take it too seriously, right? It's fun. Let's go. Aries. Aries, you're going to get broken up with because you have an extremely hard time not making everything about you. Someone expresses something they were disappointed by, something they were mad at, and you, instead of just really trying to empathize and meet them right there, you're like taking it on your ego. You're like, oh, I did this, I'm so sorry I did this. And it's almost like you're now more upset that you did something wrong, and you're drawing in all that energy, which is now outweighing or pushing out the actual issue that your partner has in the first place. So you have a tendency to make everything about you. You also have a really hard time sometimes admitting when you're wrong. And over time, that builds resentment, and it can kind of drain intimacy because it feels like no conflict is ever satisfactorily resolved, because people don't feel like they ultimately get that relief or that acknowledgement, right? Because everything is always for you like a little bit of a battle. It's a conflict and you want to win. And in totally admitting fault or you did something wrong in a pure egoless way is hard. And sometimes you need to provide it. So that's why you're getting broken up with, maybe. Pisces. Pisces, you're so good at filling up the containers around you that allows you to be sensitive and to describe and to tap into your environment and to subtleties of human nature in ways that other signs just can't even fathom. The problem is that sometimes you rely on those other people and those other structures so much to give you form and boundaries that your partner feels like they don't actually know the real you. And so sometimes they're so caught off guard by the fact that you're acting a certain way with them in one situation, but then they see you in another context and you're like this completely different person. And there's like a rupture almost in trust, in your perceived integrity, just because you're so malleable. And this can just make a partner feel unsettled and frustrated. And it's also a hard thing to communicate. I think it's sometimes hard for you to acknowledge that effect you could have on others. And sometimes it's very hard for you to just have a rational conversation about it, or even just be rational in some settings that call for it. That can be frustrating. That's why you get broken up with. Gemini, you have a hard time letting any one thing define you, your identity, your approach to life. You wear many hats, so to speak. You try things out through experience. You don't completely know what you want or what you're going to resonate with until you kind of live it out and act it out. And that can be something that totally makes sense for you. However, from a partner's perspective, sometimes this can manifest as a really frustrating unpredictability, or an expression of being hot and cold, of intimate and distant, of reliable and, unreliable. And sometimes that over time just contributes to this constant feeling of anxiety. Gemini, you naturally have a lot of nervous energy yourself, not that you're like scared or whatever, but you just have a lot of mercurial extra kind of air energy going around. And sometimes over time, like your partner picks up on that and they start to feel more anxious with you than they do safe. And they feel like they can't pin you down, or there's just not enough predictability. So that's why you get broken up with. Leo, you are regal and supremely talented and supremely creative, and you can manifest a lot of things that you really put your mind and discipline to, but sometimes you have trouble getting out of your own way. And instead of seeing your own role in doing that and self-sabotaging that, sometimes you get very much stuck in a victim mentality and you want to blame other things, you want to blame other people, you don't want to be accountable, you don't want to apply any kind of self-criticism or discipline. It's always it's always someone else's fault, or uncontrollable circumstances by external events. Sometimes it's not always about you. The world doesn't such a platitude to say, oh, the world doesn't revolve around you, but it doesn't. And sometimes it's hard for you to really embody that. And instead of trying to be adaptable to situations, you have a very strong presence no matter what. And when you're feeling great and in a good mood, you're infectious, people love you. And when you're off, you tend to drag everyone else down with you and project that negative energy in a way that other people can't get away from. And that's going to be why you get broken up with. Scorpio, there's something deep inside you, and you know what this is, but from the perspective of a partner, there's something inside you that they feel like they can never totally understand or know or touch, and they don't quite know what it is in there. They just know that it's dark, and there's a fear on their end that's always going to be there. That darkness is always kind of be there, and that disconnect between them and whatever this thing is in you that's never going to be bridged. And obviously Scorpios, you have this, your own kind of demons, your own karmic stuff to work through. From a perspective of a partner, it's like a thing where Scorpios, you don't always even understand it, and they definitely don't always understand it. And so they have a fear that, one, whatever is in there is just like too intense for them to handle. It's just sometimes too much. And secondly, they fear that whatever that is going to like too often suck up the carefreeness and the lightness and the buoyancy that they might want more consistently in their relationship. You can be powerful beyond all measure, but that can be a black hole, or at least your partner can fear that that's a black hole they're swirling around and they won't ever be able to get away from in the relationship. So that's why they break up with you, Scorpio. Libra, your need for, a lot of validation and your extreme discomfort with conflict generally just starts to feel like boring, and not only boring, but constricted, right? Your strength is creating harmony and finding, the similarities and finding how, there's ways to come to agreement. And you really like when people agree with you or see your side, and you don't like it when there's unbridgeable conflict, unbridgeable disagreement. Sometimes you don't even have a tolerance for even some disagreement because it's like you're just hyper fixated on it and it makes you uncomfortable. And conflict also enlivens the world, right? It's sometimes necessary for real conversation. The give and the take, you need to have some push and the pull, and it's invigorating, and it brings life into situations, and it also creates polarity in the context of a relationship. But when you're so intolerant of it, people start to feel like restricted and not themselves, and that they have to walk on eggshells and they have to censor themselves. And that can be really exhausting. And that's Libra, that's why you get broken up with. Virgo, you have a hard time being totally able to calmly and presently acknowledge other people's messy emotions. It's very hard for you to be totally at the same level in those vulnerable moments. You're incredibly a gifted sign. You have a lot of analytical ability. You have a problem-solving approach to issues that get brought up or other people's problems. But sometimes people aren't looking for, this cutting edge analysis or a problem-solving approach. Sometimes they just want you to share a similar story where you felt lost, or, just really acknowledge that even though the emotions are irrational or messy, that it's okay sometimes to feel those, and it's okay for the person to be where they are. Sometimes you can hear it, but you take an approach of oh, I kind of know that, but I've done this to solve it, and this is what you should do. And while it's well-intentioned, it just makes people feel oh, you have it all figured out. Sorry for, bringing my petty, lower vibration stuff to you that you clearly don't ever have to deal with. And never being able to come off the kind of I know it all already pedestal makes people feel isolated and lonely and disconnected from you. And Virgo, that's why you'll get broken up with. Aquarius, you are empathetic and you're caring on an intellectual level, on a communication level, but sometimes it's really hard for you to sometimes match your actions with those words. You say you care about these ideals and you care about values abstractly like empathy and charity or whatever, commitment to something or someone. But then sometimes you seem almost like hypocritical in that it's like the rules don't apply to you. And I think sometimes instead of being willing to compromise or see that, you can be a little bit inflexible and rigid, and you only see things through your lens. And you do so in a way that's like, well, there's right lenses to look through and wrong lenses to look through. And you're always like, my lens is the right way because I'm not necessarily smarter than you. They're not going to say that. But sometimes that seems to be the implication. Sometimes you need to let your intellectual ego down, your intellectual pretentiousness down a little bit, because it's always on guard for you. And when you don't let it down, it just makes people feel disconnected, or they're an equal partner on paper, but not in practice with the way and with the energy that you bring to the relationship. That's why you get broken up with. Again, maybe. Sagittarius, you're so much fun, you can light up a party, and you're so loving when you're in a good mood and you're feeling it and your attention is focused on the relationship. But when you suddenly get hyper interested or focused or excited by something else, you kind of leave your partner like completely hung out to dry. You're not good at sometimes balancing both of those things. And while you're really caring in moments when you are locked into the relationship, you can be like surprisingly self-righteous and selfish during times when you're not focused on that. You'll get focused on something else, you won't be giving attention to your partner, and they're like, what the F? And you get so self-righteous, you're like, well, relationships can't always be, one where like, I'm your everything, right? We have to have other things. And it's like a coldness through fire, right? It's coldness through zealous self-righteousness, if that makes sense. So even though you kind of stare at things wholeheartedly, and when you do focus back on your partner, things are good. Even when there's kind of good moments interspersed, like over time, when you can bail or totally shift your eyes somewhere else, it can create resentment over time and drain intimacy. And that's why Sagittarius gets broken up. Cancer, when you get upset, it's hard for you, it's a pain point for you to just be direct about what you're feeling and why you're feeling it and what caused it. Sometimes you play this martyr role where you're clearly upset about something, maybe not even super clearly, it just seems like something is off, but you're like, no, it's fine, you won't admit it. And so it's frustrating because for a sign that is so emotionally driven and is so intuitive and empathetic, it's kind of remarkable how little sometimes your partner knows about how you're actually feeling in the inside. Like, you feel it all, you're incredibly sensitive, but sometimes there's a gap between that feeling and the expressing, and especially in a context where there's a relationship issue that partner may want to solve, they just don't know. And so when you communicate that you're upset, either indirectly or through hints or side jabs, that it's frustrating for the partner, and it contributes to a feeling of powerlessness to solve problems because they don't know what they don't know, and side jabs don't address it. It just kind of continues to stir up indirectly the bad stuff without addressing it head on. And so that's why a Cancer would get broken up with. Taurus, flat out, and it's a platitude stereotype of Taurus, but flat out too inflexible and too stubborn, sometimes to the extent that it harms the relationship. It is your strength, but this is like stubbornness and rigidity that becomes more like negligence. There's maybe some person in your life, or that is in the presence of the relationship, that is negatively affecting it, or some commitment, like a work commitment or other obligations or other outside things that you also have a strong commitment to in addition to the relationship. And it's very hard for you to listen to that feedback or to cut things out from your life that you, you may or may not know, but to cut things out that are directly harming the integrity of the relationship, right? And it doesn't mean you need to bend on everything, but relationships, they're always compromises in a lot of regards. And so it's your unwillingness sometimes to make changes that are staring right in front of you And sometimes it's also just an inability to be aware of it, right? And it's a denial that it's even a problem when the other person brings it up. Eventually, it's almost like the friction between those things, if not dealt with, it erodes away the integrity and the intimacy in the relationship, and the other person's just like, screw it. So Taurus, that's why you would get broken up with. What do y'all think? More videos coming soon. Thank you for watching. Good to see you all. Talk to you soon.